Hello, Dumaguete.
Hello, Negros Oriental.
Hello, Sillimanians around the world.
This is Joshua Soldivillo.
And this is Ronelyn Vailoces-No.
You're watching
#Silliman.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to introduce our speaker in any event because, especially if the speakers are close to your heart. Okay? So the first speaker for this afternoon is a proud graduate of Silliman University, College of Mass Communication. After graduation, he landed a job as an online producer for ABS-CBN before migrating to the United States. There, he worked as a journalist and editor for a Filipino news magazine based in Chicago. It was also there that he got a chance to interview an up-and-coming Chicago politician named no less than Barack Obama, the future president during that time. Anyway, our speaker pursued his master's degree in journalism at Columbia University in New York. And that paved the way for his employment at Al Jazeera English Online Division, where he has been working since 2012. As an Al Jazeera journalist, he has covered the 2013 Yolanda typhoon disaster, the aftermath of the Palu, Indonesia earthquake, the Myanmar elections, the Iran nuclear deal, and of course, the Duterte war on drugs. He now works in the Asia-Pacific desk of Al Jazeera and hopes to transition back to field reporting, her first love in journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker is Mr. Ted Regencia. Our second speaker is also a graduate of mass communication at Far Eastern University. She took executive course in countering ideological and political warfare in Ateneo School of Government and took up a postgraduate degree in international security in Barcelona, Spain. In 2018, she was awarded one of the 10 Outstanding Young Filipinos Award in international journalism. She is currently the president of the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines, or FOCAP, and at the same time, a lecturer at the Ateneo School of Government on Media and the Military. She is an advisor on strategic communications for the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy. She founded the Sinagtala Center for Women and Children in Conflict. Of course, the rich experience from Al Jazeera English as a correspondent in 2009 to 2012 gave her the rich experience that she would want to share with us this afternoon. Our second speaker, Ms. Jamela Alindogan.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Bing, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. To our members of the faculty, to, of course, our honored guest this afternoon, Jam. Thank you so much for gracing this event. I'm really very thankful that you made it today. It's hard to believe that it's been 12 years since I started as an employee of Al Jazeera English Online. I'd like to believe that as a kid from Mindanao, that I've earned that spot in the international newsroom through hard work. This photo from our October 2018 coverage of the aftermath of the 7.5 earthquake and tsunami in Palu, Indonesia, really encapsulated, I think, my experience in reporting in the field for Al Jazeera. At the time when it's really becoming more and more challenging for us to do this profession, when sometimes it feels like we're drowning in disinformation, it is really heartwarming that today I'm seeing all these young people who are here who have shown this passion for journalism. And again, it really gives me hope, and I thank all of you, because now more than ever, we really need you in this field, and we need your idealism. So again, thank you so much for aspiring to be journalists and communicators, and for choosing this journalism field. Getting invited to events like this actually also gives me a pause and reflect on my role as a journalist, and who had the opportunity to report on different places. Whenever I do some of this introspection, I'm often reminded of this quote attributed to Martin Niemöller. I quote, "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak either because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." I think about this quote often because covering the news, I have witnessed and experienced it myself. In 2015, I was deployed by Al Jazeera to Yangon in Myanmar to cover the historic parliamentary elections. That election actually paved the way for the eventual restoration of democracy in the country. It was a great time of great hope and optimism for many millions of young people in the country. As a journalist, I was also really thrilled to cover that election and coming face to face with Aung San Suu Kyi, covering the press conference that she held inside her property in Yangon. And I think if there's such thing as a journalistic high, I would say that it's one of those feelings that I experienced on that day. But everything went quickly downhill from there. In August of 2017, Myanmar's military raided villages belonging to the Muslim minority Rohingya. Thousands of Rohingya were killed. Their homes burned to the ground, and close to 1 million of them were forced to flee to neighboring Bangladesh. At that time, Muslims only make up 5% of the country's predominantly Buddhist population. Now it's even less. And yet, disinformation and incitement on social media, including Facebook, made people believe that Rohingya were a threat, ready to take over the country, and laid the foundation for the violence that followed. I think the very weak institutions in Myanmar at that time, including the media, allowed the spread of disinformation in the country. And for all of that, Aung San Suu Kyi just stayed silent, never really lifted a finger to stand for the Rohingya people. Because she's not a Rohingya herself, Aung San Suu Kyi refused to speak out as well. Next, the Myanmar government came after the journalists who were reporting about human rights abuses and killings of Rohingya people. With the exception of a few groups inside Myanmar, nobody cared for the two Reuters journalists, Wa Lon and Kyaw So U, who were arrested and imprisoned under the country's Official Secrets Act. Both journalists spent 500 days in prison before they were pardoned and ordered released in 2019. but they should not have been imprisoned in the first place. But because they couldn't care less about us journalists, many in Myanmar also refused to speak out. Then, out of the blue, the military declared a coup d'etat on February 21st of 2021. I remember I was also at the desk at that time, and we were just rushing through taking care of breaking news, and suddenly this breaking news from Myanmar popped out in early morning of that day. Aung San Suu Kyi was the first to be sent to jail, and she is still in jail, like many others. By then, no one was left to speak out for them. Anyone who dared was met with a baton or a bullet. In 5 short years, Myanmar's democracy was over, kaput. Today, Myanmar is still under a military dictatorship and facing a bloody civil war, with doctors, engineers, and professors even taking up arms. And like I said, there was no one left to speak out for them, including for Aung San Suu Kyi, who has basically destroyed her reputation as a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. And the lesson here is that as early as possible, we really need to speak out and speak up whenever we see injustice. As for us journalists, we should continue to bear witness to what's happening in our communities and give voice to the people who otherwise have no voice in the society. Here in the Philippines, we may have a stronger institutions that are still able to withstand constant barrage of disinformation and incitement. But if we are not too careful, we might lose altogether the remaining freedoms we are still enjoying right now. And we've already lost some of them. Efforts to dismantle our institutions are happening every day. Disinformation is still spreading like COVID, mutating like mpox, ready to infect our information ecosystem. Maria Ressa, who was here last year, also touched on this in her address to the Harvard University graduates earlier this year. She said, the end goal of this is really to sow chaos and breakdown in our information ecosystem. Today, the information system is becoming, or slowly even becoming, more poisoned. So, like I said, while we still can, let us use our platform as journalists and communicators, or even TikTok influencers, to speak out and spread factual information. The thing about the spread of disinformation and old school propaganda these days, however, is that it's happening on real time and it's happening very fast. So we also have to respond very quickly. Let me just say that I think that the role of foreign correspondents has also evolved since the time that most Western journalists are covering the news and are being deployed all across the world. And I think Jamela is one of the best examples of a Filipino journalist who was able to report for Al Jazeera and other international news organizations very well because she understands the issues that the Philippines is facing these days, from the issue of climate change to military conflict. And I think that in order for us to grapple and to become more effective in our reporting in the future, that it's important for us to understand the nuances of the issues in the Philippines. For example, if it's about the very hot issue nowadays about Pogo, or the fight between the parties of President Marcos and Vice President Sara Duterte. If you understand more the context of these issues and you read thoroughly about the nuances and the political backgrounds of these our elected political leaders, then you'd become a more effective reporter and journalist and communicators. And so at this point, I would like to give the floor to our honored guest, Ms. Jamela Alindogan, who will talk more about her own experience in foreign reporting and as well as disinformation.
Hey, Silliman! Did you miss us? Because we missed you.
And we're so excited to see all of you again.
And work towards an empowered Silliman. Empowered Silliman! Empowered Silliman! Empowered Silliman!
Empowered Silliman.
Empowered Silliman! 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 Welcome back, Sillimanians.
To your home away from home.
Together, let's work towards an empowered Silliman. Empowered Silliman!
And thank you too, ma'am, for the introduction. Unfortunately, I am much older than being a journalist from 2009 to 2012. I was actually a correspondent of Al Jazeera until 2022. That's how old I am. I'm 41 years old, and I was telling everyone here that I remember about maybe you weren't born yet, probably 2002. Who was born here 2002? Who's already alive here? Oh, good. I actually took a summer writing workshop here for the school paper. I was a campus journalist for FEU, and I think we spent a couple of, should I stand up here? I spent a couple of days here learning how to write. So, you know, we always look up to Silliman, really, as a place of literary, it's a literary giant, you know, in the field of journalism, in the field of writing. This discussion will be two parts. First, I'm going to play a report I did in Marawi in 2017. This report was done in the eastern part of Lake Lanao in a small town called Tamparan. And it had been months since, the video muna, sorry. Okay, and it had been months since the Maute group took control of the only Sharia city in Mindanao and in the country, Marawi, under Islamic law. So it had been months, and this was the impact, one of the impacts of that war. Please watch. Iman had a miscarriage. The baby was to be her first child. Fatima and her husband Bilal were separated when the siege in Marawi began more than 2 months ago. She ended up in this hospital in Tamparan, extremely weak and suffering from a severe infection. Bilal finally made it here, and he says his ordeal was painful.
We hid in the forest for days. We uprooted banana trees just so we can eat parts of it. We swam through the river and managed to get to the shore, only for the police to lock us up in jail, where we were interrogated.
The Philippine military continues to battle it out against an ISIL-inspired group called the Maute in southern Philippines. Hundreds have already been killed, including civilians who were caught in the crossfire. More than 200,000 people have fled, and many of them walked for days just to get to this eastern part of Lake Lanao, where the situation is just as dire. Since the crisis in Marawi began, the number of patients here have more than doubled. Most of them are children. At least 15 towns are dependent on this hospital alone, and parents tell us they walked for hours with their children just to get here. Almost all of them are evacuees from Marawi. Most of them are diagnosed with infection and waterborne diseases. There are not enough beds and the supply of medicines is fast running out. Since the crisis began, the hospital and nearby towns have been without electricity and running water. Dr. Podre Ali says the situation here feels like a recurring nightmare. The medical foundation she set up right beside the government hospital is able to augment the services needed for the patients here, but it is barely enough.
If we are killing ISIS, how about the people of Lanao del Sur? Are the ISIS? Everybody is an ISIS. The government can provide anything for us. We cannot run to the government. We run to Allah, and Allah will protect us.
The area of Tamparan is extremely remote. We were told we are the first journalists to get to this side of the lake. The military says this part of the lake is teeming of Maute recruits and their sympathizers. That is not true, people here tell us. There are no Maute fighters. There is only suffering. Jamela, Alindogan, Jazeera, Tamparan, Lanao del Sur, Southern Philippines. I was quite affected by this story because, not only because I am a mother, but because it had been months since the crisis started and fighting broke out, and yet, you know, it's not far crossing one part of Lake Lanao to another, but you see in this video the impact of disinformation. Disinformation is not a battle between Mo Kauson and some spokesperson of the opposition. Disinformation threatens all institutions. Disinformation is a threat to national security and threatens the very fabric of our societies. And this is the impact of that. You know, when the fighting broke out, there was this very strong discrimination against Muslims, that everyone coming from this community were actually ISIS members, were Maute members, were complicit, right, in the influence of ISIS growing in this region. Absolutely not true. So I'm showing you this because this is a prelude to, it's gonna look like a workshop. I'll try not to do it. This is a lecture I do for the AFP, the PNP sometimes, and this is the first time I'm actually gonna be doing it to mass communication students. Disinformation and the threat of a manipulated world. We all know, next slide please, what disinformation is. It's always an issue of whether we can define it, right? So do you guys know the difference between disinformation and misinformation or malinformation? The challenge always is to define what is misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation is a deliberate attempt to fool the public, to distort information for a particular purpose. Misinformation sometimes, although not absolute, is often defined as misinformation where it may or may not be deliberate. Now, what is malinformation? No? Who follows Elon Musk on Twitter? Malinformation is what he termed as when somebody releases, for example, personal details about you that could hurt you, that intends to hurt you. Yung nag-viral na nanakit ng ganito, ito yung bahay niya. Yeah, ganyan. Yaan ang tinatawag na one factor of malinformation. So the problem with defining misinformation and disinformation is that we never really know what the intent is. It's not always clear. And we don't really see the impact of, we don't really get to figure out until much, much later. Now, because it seeps into our subconscious, right, and permeates into our discussion. So, there's misinformation versus misperception. Ano yung misperception naman? Delikado daw yung magpa-vaccinate kasi daw, baka daw mawala yung other vaccines that you have. So that's in a way a misperception. Misperception also is rooted dun sa ating cultural beliefs natin and societal beliefs, no? Our own socio-political contexts and backgrounds. Next slide, please. The problem with information is that it's not always static. It is always evolving. So imagine if you're a comms expert or you're someone teaching journalism. I teach in Ateneo de Davao University. I teach conflict-sensitive journalism. It's so complex kasi ang bilis nung pag-evolve nung different types of development sa information sphere, no? So ang hirap niyang i-define. And narratives are often, just remember, a result of deliberate promotion. Hindi yan hardly organic. And as communication experts, you need to always think, bakit masyadong prevalent itong ganitong klase ng narrative? Be suspicious enough to think it must be coming from somewhere. And it's good to be suspicious. And I say modern wars, I'm not talking about the Spanish time, now at this point, is all about struggling to shape and control and to revise the historical narrative. Kung sino yung mauna, no, sa laban sa information, siya yung panalo. Right? Next slide, please. Objectives of disinformation: to distort, distract, divide, dismiss, and spread fear and hate. No? Distort, distract, divide, and even polarize societies. Dismiss credible institution, credible voices, right? And spread fear and hate. Next slide, please. I'll go very, very quickly to this. If you want to use it, you can use it. 9 types of disinformation, strategies and misinformation, satire, parody. You know what that means, right? Misleading content, misleading use of information to frame an issue, ibang klase ng context. Imposter content, nako, nabiktima na ako nito. Fabricated content, news is 100% false. That's another way. False connection, headlines and visuals that don't support the content. Yung picture maganda, pero pag clinic mo siya, nagbibenta pala siya ng racumen. Yung mga ganong klase, di ba? False content, genuine information that is shared with false contextual information. Shiminat. That's another one. Manipulated content is another example. Perfect would be Shiminat, right? Conspiracy theory, we know what this is. I've seen over the past few months, it stopped recently, I've seen videos of naval ships na parang susugurin yung Pilipinas. Sino nakakita nito sa TikTok? May Lola saw it, susugurin na ba tayo? It's very prevalent. Conspiracy theories. That's propaganda. We know what that is. As journalism students, you need to know what propaganda is, how it looks like, how it sounds, right? If it smells like propaganda, looks like propaganda, sounds like propaganda, it probably is. Tama. Okay. The mere absence of war does not necessarily signify the absence of violence. Why am I telling you this? Because physical violence is not the only form of violence. Structural violence continued to persist. And disinformation, right, or the lack of access to clear, timely, relevant information is a form of structural violence, and one that journalists continue to fight. No, not just our fight, but also your fight. Right? So, just because wala namang gera, ganyan, wala tayong conflict. No, we are at war. We are fighting a different kind of warfare, and one that goes straight to us with no defense. No? We need to see that. What is subtle control? What is disinformation? The main aim of these information operation campaigns is to make democracy submit without resorting to direct confrontation or military actions. Do you understand what this means? Hindi na natin kailangang maggera. Hindi na kailangang lulusob yung mga Hapon, di ba? Dati, naku, padating na yung mga Hapon. Hindi ganon ang modern conflict. Ang modern conflict, they destroy and polarize society first from within. Tapos na ang laban, di pa nagsisimula. Because you and I wouldn't even think that the West Philippine Sea conflict is worth fighting for. Why? Because you're all distracted by ano ba yun? Yung nagsasayaw ng, she's smelling my she. Yeah, mga ganyan. You're all distracted by that. Or you're distracted by Ivana Alawi or Andrea Brillantes or all the TikTok dances. Because of this, we spend less and less time focusing on critical, important issues. And more time being entertained, right? That's what subtle control is. That's a form of information warfare. You get destroyed from within. And China's cabbage strategy is called winning a war without firing a single shot. That's what it is. And it's not only China that does it. Other countries do it. Media manipulation in a post-truth world, what is that, right? Let's have a look. Ano na ba yung media ngayon pag sinabing media? Dati pag sinabing media, journalist kaming dalawa lang ni Ted ngayon. Ngayon, marami ng media. Meron ng gumagawa ng sarili nilang content. 'Di ba? Meron ng content producer. Meron ng nagti-TikTok. Which, when it started, seemed like a really good idea. Imagine when citizens and journalists came, we were like, oh my God, hindi ko na kaagad-agad ngayon na kailangan tumakbo sa isang sunog kasi yung nandun, pwede nilang i-upload. The problem with this is that it pollutes when everybody does it and you don't follow a certain pattern or you're not dedicated to the truth, it pollutes the information environment. And that's when it becomes very, very difficult to sift through and figure out what is real and what is not. Conclusion. Ayan, conclusion, screenshot. Disinformation poses a grave threat due to the absence of, permit my use of this term because I was using this sa military lecture namin, clear rules of engagement, no? When you go into conflict, alam natin, rules are rules, di ba? Civilians are off limits, journalists cannot be targeted, but not in information warfare. Walang limit. Anything is possible. And you don't know who you're up against because it's invisible, right? Disinformation is elusive. With rapid evolution, it renders it very hard to trace and counteract in real time. Pinapatay pa lang natin yung apoy dito, andito na yung isa. Diba? My description of disinformation, somebody asked me the other day, how hard is it to fight disinformation? I describe it as a tsunami of false information, and I only have a bucket, right, with my hands. That's all I have. Ganon kahirap yung disinformation. Hindi kaya ng journalists lamang. All right? What's wrong about disinformation? It provides you a false sense of confidence, right? Di, huwag natin problemahin yung West Philippine Sea, malayo yan. Di natin problema yan, di ba? We are distracted eh. So, hindi mo na-assess gaano ba talaga ka-critical yung threat sa atin. Right? Ganon yung issue ng disinformation. It gives you a false sense of confidence. Akala natin popular yung presidente, yung pala trolls lang yung nagpasikat sa kanya. Akala natin popular talaga yung mayor, sikat siya kasi ang dami ano, pero hindi talaga siya appreciated or hindi talaga tama yung sentiment. That's where it becomes very dangerous. Next slide, please. Okay? Next slide, please. We all have one thing in common, whether you're a journalist, a professor, a student, right? Or a soldier or a government official. We are all accountable to the public that we serve, no? Critical, not to be political, but to be politically astute. It's one thing that was not taught to me when I was a young journalist. Paano ba nasiguraduhin natin na hindi tayo maging political? Madali lang yun eh. Hindi ako political. Hindi ako mag-endorse ng kahit sinong politiko. Hindi ako makikipag-inuman sa kanila. I will not endorse any policy. But to be politically astute is harder. It is harder because you don't see how you are, how do you say that? Pushed, right? To go to a certain flow of narrative. Ganon din yung disinformation. Next slide, please. Rather than imagining how the world should function, we ought to examine how it actually operates. We need to be adept at fighting disinformation. Ngayon na, no? Hindi yung, dapat kasi ganito. Hindi. Dapat alam nyo kung paano to labanan. Diba? Empty words are not enough. We really need to fight disinformation at a local grassroots level. Next slide, please. Thank you.